Welcome to Annapolis Mosaics. Our program spotlights people in our community who are involved in activities designed to promote good human relations. I am Michael Keller, the chair of the Annapolis Human Relations Commission and your host. The commission is a city board that seeks to promote equal opportunity and to eliminate discrimination. My guest today is Tammy Bresnahan, who is the Director of Advocacy for AARP Maryland. Tammy, welcome to Annapolis Mosaics.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, let's start by talking about the mission of AARP and what guides the organization.
Well, the organization started over 50 years ago, and the primary reason for its beginning was our founder, Ethel Percy Andrus, who was a retired school teacher, and at that point in the late 1950s realized that older Americans did not have access to health care, and that the primary reason for an older person to be declined insurance was that the pre-existing condition was just because of their age. So she formed AARP and began lobbying Congress, and then in 1965 Medicare was established. And out of that, our social mission is what we do for all. So we work on health care, making sure that 50-plus Marylanders are able to age in place, have services and programs available to them, and are aware of what their rights are.
Who does AARP Maryland specifically serve, and how many members do you have statewide, Tammy?
Statewide, we have about 895,000 members, and we serve all Marylanders 50 and over.
Okay. Looking at the state level, because that's what you deal with in your position, what are AARP's legislative priorities for the coming session?
So our CEO, Joanne Jenkins, likes to use a phrase, health, wealth, and self. So primarily our priorities are around those three areas. And in the health arena, one of the bigger things that we're working on during this legislative session with the Maryland General Assembly is prescription drug transparency and prescription drug gouging. And the first one requires pharmaceutical companies to outline how much it costs them to produce a drug. Mainly we're talking about generic drugs that have been on the market sometimes more than 30 years. And in the case of the price gouging, it gives the Attorney General of Maryland the opportunity to go after a pharmaceutical company that may gouge the system. So, for instance, when we had the EpiPen crisis, they were charging about $50, $35 to $50 per EpiPen prescription, and then all of a sudden it soared to around $1,000, and now it's back down after bad publicity to $300. So our biggest priority this session is prescription drugs and making them affordable. The largest user of prescription drugs are 50-plus population, and when you get to 65, almost 1 in 4 seniors are using at least 1 to 2, sometimes 4 prescription drugs.
Go on.
So another thing that we look at and focusing on the home, keeping Marylanders 50 plus in their home or when they retire. Affordable and reliable utilities is something that a lot of people don't realize that we work on. Holding the electric companies accountable, working with our counterparts in the Office of the People's Counsel and the Public Service Commission, and making sure they understand that soaring utility rates can often hinder someone being able to stay in their home that they've worked so hard all their life to maintain. We also are working on the sick leave, because one of the primary reasons that people, when they get sick, they depend on their family. And over 800,000 workers in Maryland have no access to sick leave, and elder care is a part of this bill. So that is one of the reasons why we are supporting elder care. And then, of course, retirement security, making sure that pensions stay viable, that Social Security stays viable. So those are a few things that we're working on this session.
Okay. Well, AARP Maryland is concerned about family caregivers. Could you elaborate a little on what AARP is doing in this particular area?
So we have a whole resource center online, if you go to aarp.org, about resources for caregivers. But specifically in Maryland, we worked on a provision that took us a couple of years to get through the Maryland General Assembly, which we like to call the CARE Act. And the CARE Act does a couple of things. It allows a loved one who is caring for a patient some rights when that patient goes into the hospital. One, it allows them to be recorded in the record. The second thing, it requires the hospital to notify them if there's any changes to that patient, i.e. they get released or they get sent to another facility like a rehab. We have heard horror stories where, the 85-year-old wife didn't know that the 90-year-old husband was being moved to a rehab, and that becomes stressful. And then the third piece of that is requiring hospitals to engage with the family caregiver, to teach them or to help them understand what the needs of the patient is once they're released from the hospital. So we have a whole activity, a whole gamut of resources for family caregivers online and individually. We know we belong to the Maryland Caregivers Support Coordinating Council, so we have a lot of resources out there to help family caregivers.
You mentioned earlier the work that AARP Maryland is doing in terms of its focus on utilities. And I know that AARP has called on the Maryland Public Service Commission to preserve the availability and quality of landline phones. And in the age in which cell phones are becoming so frequent, why is it important to focus on landlines?
So there's a couple of things, and we've been criticized because people say, you all need to get with the program. Technology is where it is. Well, if you live in the outlying areas, the Eastern Shore, the Lower Eastern Shore, the Lower Southern Maryland, Western Maryland, access to broadband and to cell phones is very limited. So one of the reasons why we're not opposed to moving people forward, but we want to make sure that the landlines or that there is a reasonable substitute or something that people can depend on. And at this point in time, broadband is not accessible in those areas. And in Baltimore City, people don't have a choice for FiOS. And they only have DSL. So we want to make sure that when they call 911, and this is the other little dirty secret that the telephone companies don't like to tell you, is that when you dial 911, if you're not on a landline, they don't know where you are. So if you happen to be a stroke victim and you can't speak, and you only have a cell phone, you can't tell someone where you are. So it's very important that the technology be compatible. And right now, local government, they have the 911 service, but when you call off of your cell phone, it doesn't tell you where that person is. You have to tell them where you are. So we want to move forward with technological advances. We just want to make sure that it's available to all Marylanders.
AARP also is involved in efforts to fight hunger in Maryland. What specifically are you doing in this capacity?
So in the
and how does it relate to your overall mission to serving people 50 years or older?
So one of the things that we will be doing in the next few months is that we call Harvest for the Hungry. We will be going out into local supermarkets, and our volunteers will help him fill a bag. It'll cost about $10 per bag, and then that will be donated to the food bank, the local food banks. And we'll be doing that most likely across the state and maybe some places in southern Maryland, and it will be on our website, AARP, www.aarp.org, MD. And so goes to our mission. We know a couple of things when people start to age, and anyone that's had an aging parent, my mom was in her late 80s when she died. You know, I'd call her up and I'd say, "What did you have for dinner today?" And she would say, "Oh, yogurt." And so one of the things that we know that they don't really like to eat what they should eat, or they're stretching their pennies. I mean, in this day and age, we do know that some of our members have to choose between their food and their prescription drugs. And we don't believe that people that have aged and retired and who've given to the community, that they should not be able to at least put food on the tables. And we want to make sure that we have a senior hunger program so that all Marylanders have nutrition.
You mentioned earlier the whole issue of aging in place. Surveys have shown that way over 60% of all elderly people indicate that it's their desire to age in place in their own homes. Only about maybe 15% or so say that they would like to go to a assisted living facility or continuing care community or the like. And even smaller percentages say, well, I'd like to depend on my children. So with that in mind, you had mentioned that AARP is concerned about this issue of aging in place. What exactly have you done in this area?
So one of the things that we worked on about 5 years ago, when states were moving to the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid, we did lobby for that more Medicaid dollars be put into home and community-based services. So that's one of the things that we've done. We work with the utilities to make sure that their utility bills aren't exorbitant, that they have access to communication information. And so if we can do just those few things, we know that the average Marylander lives on about $2,000 a month, which isn't very much. And so we know we have to keep their expenses down. And so that's why we're in front of the General Assembly saying, remember when you do this tax, remember when you do this surcharge on a utility bill, these folks have a very, very limited income.
AARP has been recognized for a Veterans Welcome Home program. Could you share with our viewers what that initiative is all about?
So last year, we did a collaboration with the Department of Defense because they were working on the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War. And they were trying to acknowledge those veterans and Vietnam War era veterans, their service during the Vietnam War period, because we know how Vietnam vets were treated when they came home. There wasn't the ticker tape, there wasn't a lot of happiness, and so the Department of Defense, President Barack Obama signed an order that allowed them to commemorate the 50th anniversary, and we joined as a partner, and we brought veterans to Annapolis last February, and they gave each veteran, we had a retired admiral and a captain there from the Naval Academy, and some of the service members, Senator John Astle were there, while we gave each veteran a pin from the Department of Defense thanking them for their service during the Vietnam War. And we've continued that work. We have one volunteer who works extensively on veterans issues, making sure that we have a voice in Annapolis, making sure that they're educated about the legislative process. We just had an event last week where we taught them how to navigate the Maryland General Assembly website, talked about the bills that were introduced. So we are trying to make sure that we have a great collaboration with them and their needs.
We're going to take a break now, but when we return, I'll be talking with Tammy Bresnahan about some more items dealing with AARP Maryland, and then we're going to look at AARP's priorities nationally. I'm talking today with Tammy Bresnahan, who is the Director of Advocacy for AARP Maryland. Tammy, does AARP Maryland make use of volunteers, and if so, in what ways?
Oh, you bet we do. We are always trying to recruit new volunteers. And again, you can go to our website. We have a number of activities and trainings. We use them at the Maryland General Assembly. We use them for Harvest for the Hungry. We have something what we call, and we love Movies for Grown-Ups, where we offer free movies in different locations. We just had one last night in celebration of Black History Month at the Reginald Lewis Museum. We've had one on the Eastern Shore. We use volunteers extensively to work with our members of Congress on issues that are happening on Capitol Hill. We use volunteers in a multitude on our Fraud Watch campaign, where they are presenting to other groups like senior centers, community groups, churches on fraud and what those scams look like and how to prevent them. So we use volunteers in a variety of different ways.
Okay. One of the items that are on your website that caught my attention was a slogan for AARP Maryland. It said, "Making a difference where you live." What would you rate as being most important for volunteers in terms of making a difference in this area?
That they get to work with a population that is otherwise not, on the radar screen. That they are helping them stay in their home as long as they want. That they are helping them remain, identity theft, clear. That they're giving them some information that will help them look at their email so that they don't click on and their identity is stolen, that they are helping the senior food, supplemental food nutrition program, like I like to call it, that they are helping them eat every day. So there's a multitude of things that they can be involved in and that they can feel good about, because we know that seniors have given their whole life to the community, and that we as an organization that have volunteers that are capable of, we have a volunteer, for example, who's working on water shutoff. That in the city, if you don't pay your water bill, you can be foreclosed on. And so she's been working with one of the legislators specifically on water shutoff notices. And sometimes when seniors they don't have that mortgage and they don't have their taxes coming out, they forget to pay some of their bills. And so she's working on outreach to them, saying, make sure you pay your bills, make sure you stay up on your taxes. So there's a multitude of things that we do to make life a little better that a volunteer can get excited about.
Okay. Turning to the national scene now. Medicare is a key issue for AARP now. Why is it on the front burner? Didn't President Trump pledge to resist changes to the program during the presidential campaign?
Yes, he has. And if your viewers and you may have seen some commercials, that we are holding him to his words. But we do know there's things happening on Capitol Hill as we speak that would change Medicare. We know that the Speaker has historically wanted to change Medicare to a voucher system or a premium support system, as he likes to call it, where you would just get a lump sum of money. Medicare has always been, a benefit. And it has not been a defined contribution. It has been a benefit that can be used, as needed, and that would change the system. Like I said when we first started, AARP was founded by Ethel Percy Andrus because of the lack of insurance that the senior population had, and this was her biggest victory, was establishing the Medicare program. Does it need some tweaking? Of course it does. We need drug companies to be held accountable. Medicare is the only insurance program of its type that cannot negotiate drug prices with pharmaceutical companies. And as we know, drugs have soared. And when you have seniors on drugs, they're the biggest user of prescription drugs. They are a captive audience. So we have mobilized. Next week, we are working with our members of Congress. We have our staff and our volunteers going out to each member of Congress to make sure that they understand what our situation is with Medicare, what our members want. We know that our members overwhelmingly don't want changes to Medicare. Do they want changes in a positive way? Yes. This is a big campaign that has a lot of moving pieces.
You mentioned the issue of the cost of prescription drugs. I'd like to go back to that just for a second. During the presidential campaign, there were very few issues that Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton agreed on, but one of them was that individuals be allowed to purchase drugs from Canada, for example, or other developed nations where they could get it at a far cheaper price. Now, this recently came up for a vote in the Senate. It failed by just a handful of votes, with both some Republicans and some Democrats voting for it. It was bipartisan, but unfortunately there were more no votes than yes votes, both on Democratic and Republican sides. How do you see making progress on an issue clearly where you had the two presidential candidates saying we ought to do this, and now we've got this difficulty in getting it through Congress?
Well, as I stated earlier, we were working on prescription drugs at the state level, and yesterday we had a 4-hour hearing on prescription drugs, and that question came up to the pharmaceutical companies: why are we, the United States, pay more than Canada, Sweden? There was a whole chart. And that question really was not answered. Something about, well, they have different systems. And I understand that we have different systems, but we also have a responsibility to the people. We shouldn't form prescription drugs as a privilege. It should be a right. And so we don't really know what the answer is. Why is it cheaper in Canada? Why can't we go to Canada? I think through the transparency drug that we have before the Maryland General Assembly, we're trying to figure out what it costs and then maybe compare the two. Pharma has a very aggressive lobby in Annapolis, and the only thing that I can recommend is that folks get on board with AARP and they write to their Congress folks and tell them how important that drug affordability and availability is. Congress
and the Trump administration is working to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare. How does AARP stand on that?
Well, we supported the Affordable Care Act in 4 ways. One, it repealed any pre-existing conditions. And again, sometimes just being old was a pre-existing condition. 2, it allowed children up to age 26, which we supported, to stay on their parents. If you're older like me and you have a younger son who's 17, he can stay on my insurance until he turns 26. The third thing that it did, it provided free screenings. It provided diabetic screenings, cancer screenings, and it allowed them to get flu shots. And the other thing, because you had people in a larger pool in the Medicaid system, you had more money. It would be firming the program up for the future. So that's the message that we're trying to give to the president and to the members of Congress, that if you change these things, remember, these are very popular items with our membership and people across the country, quite frankly.
Yeah. Preserving Social Security is another long-time priority for AARP. What needs to be done to keep the program solvent long-term?
There's a couple of things that they could do. One of the things that has been talked about is, increasing the amount of payroll tax. Right now it's around $118,000, and we know that that's about
raising the cap.
Yes, raising the cap, and on the payroll tax, and that is about $118,000. And we know that most people today, that's almost middle class. So we know that there's a lot more people that could be paying a little bit more to firm up that program. So that's one of the ideas. The couple of the ideas that have been going through Congress are increase the age to 67 or 70. And while I don't know much about what that would happen to the economic end of it, we know that people working longer is, today it may be more viable, but we'll see for the future.
Okay. Beyond advocacy, what are some of the benefits that people get for being a member of AARP?
Well, they get a free lobbying service. So, and let me make that clear. We are a lobbying organization, the advocacy end. We do lobby Congress, we do lobby the legislators, but we do not, we are nonpartisan, and we do not contribute to a PAC. That means we do not give money to candidates, and we don't endorse candidates. So we try to walk that very straight line that we are neither Democrat, Republican, or independent. We do what we do for all. And so the benefits associated with that, there's discounts for retail, for hotel stays, for cars, rental cars, for restaurants, you name it, cell phones. I think we even have a collaboration with Uber. So there's a lot of benefits. Like the benefit package. Please go to the website and you'll see probably about 100 benefits for joining AARP for your kind of $16 a year membership.
Well, how can people get in touch with you? I'm sure many of our viewers are going to want to know. What is your website address? How can they reach you, Tammy?
All right, so our website address is www.aarp.org/Maryland, or if you don't have access to the internet, you can call 1-866-542-8163. And during the legislative session, if you live in Annapolis, I'm located at 15 School Street on the first floor.
Thank you for viewing our program today, and please join us again on Annapolis Mosaics. If you would like more information about the Annapolis Human Relations Commission, please jot down the information on your screen. You can reach us at 410-263-7998 or by email at hrcommission@annapolis.gov. Or check out our page at the City of Annapolis website. Go to www.annapolis.gov, click on Government, then Boards and Commissions, and scroll down to the Human Relations Commission page. And always remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "We have flown the air like birds and swum the seas like fishes, but have yet to learn the simple act of walking the earth as brothers and sisters."